University, and I was able to pair with the forensics program at our university to do a virtual reality simulation game. So this is a presentation on that. And Amy, who was our client, as I like to say, is going to give some background on her side of the project. So Amy.
I'll just yell real loud. My students always tell me I'm too loud. I'm Amy Houghton, and I'm the program director for the Forensic Investigations program at Utah Valley University. I've been there this is my 6th year, and then prior to that, I spent almost 12 years as a special agent with NCIS, so shout out to them. But the way this program started, or this project started, is Natalie went to her faculty mentor, which is Marty, sitting up here, and they are responsible for doing a project and have a client, and she's been super interested in forensics. So even though she wasn't a forensic science student, she had the background of obviously computer stuff, way smarter than me. I don't know how they did what they made, but they came to me to see what kind of things could be beneficial, what kind of project could they work on that we could utilize in our department. So as we brainstormed, we came down, narrowed it down to a crime scene processing scenario simulation. That if we couldn't get our students directly out, we do have a crime scene house that we can use as a practical facility, but something where they could practice and get some experience in the VR world, but still be processing a crime scene. And so Natalie led a team of 3 other students, and we worked on it. Well, they worked on it, and I went through and tested it with them for a year as they came up with this project, and did a fantastic job. And so now it's something that, as they're working on just finalizing some of the glitches and things like that, that now my students I can send them over, or if we were to get the Oculuses, to be able to have them work in a VR simulation that just gives them the training, and it works on, like Natalie will explain it, but it's a point system that I can actually go in afterwards and see, did they get this? Did they, take a photograph of this? Did they miss a piece of evidence? And it will point system them and grade them. So at the end I can say, oh, you got 80 out of 100, and this is what you missed, and walk them through that. So it was just a really great project. I'm not going to take any more of Natalie's time, but that's kind of how it got started, because of her interest in forensics and her ability to work in the VR space that would provide us with something useful. So I'll turn it back over to her.
Thank you, Amy. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the development process, because I assume that's kind of the side that I know that maybe not everyone else in this room knows. Initial part of the project was, like Amy said, to create a study tool for students so that they wouldn't have to completely rebuild the physical crime scene in the crime scene house every time the students needed to practice something. They'd be able to go in at any time, practice things that they learned in the classroom and in the lab, and get that retention and all of that understanding, so they go into their final in the real crime scene house with the investigation and can complete it satisfactorily. So some of the benefits that we found, and that we kind of pitched this to Amy, that it's reusable, obviously, because it's a digital product. You can use it as many times as you want. You can edit it, so if techniques were going to change or procedures in the future, those could be edited and changed within the VR system. We also implemented multiplayer, because the students go in as a team of around 3 or 4, so they would also be able to practice as students in their teams for their final. So getting those interpersonal problems out early before their final would be really beneficial to them. And then obviously, because there's a grading system, it can be adjusted for varying levels of difficulty. If Amy wanted to take this to a high school, for example, to recommend her program to students, it could be, the difficulty could be taken down or up depending on who is the one playing. So the development process. First was our pre-production, which we kind of had very structured in our class to follow what the game industry follows. So we were really lucky to be able to get with Amy in her lab And she taught us, as you can see in this photo, all of the different types of evidence and collection methods that students use in that same class, so that we could have a physical, kinetic understanding of exactly what to mimic in the VR version. And that was just amazing. We took tons of video and photo, and it was really informative on how to develop for VR. Our initial thought was that we would be developing for the Valve Index, which is the pink one, the pink background one. And because it's such a robust system, we found though, after already starting to develop, that it was a bit too expensive for our use, and it really needs a space, determined space for it to be used, because you can see these two sensors that mark where the player is in space, whereas the Oculus is an all-in-one system. You can use it anywhere in any amount of space that you have. You can take it with you places, and it's just really easy and user-friendly, and obviously far cheaper. Here are some of the stats in the comparison. So that was, you know, a no-brainer when we decided what to develop for. We also developed for Oculus specifically because they partnered with Unity, which is a game engine, and have really great documentation. They have built-in packages and things to make the development process really smooth and simple. I mean, as smooth and simple as it can be, but it really helped the first portion, because we had never developed in VR before this project, so it was really helpful. After we kind of made all of our plans and started building functionality, we call what was the white box phase, which is kind of blocking in models. You put in really just simplistic things just to be placeholders for the future, nicer, real looking models. And you can see here we have a white box crime scene house, and then these are like the tables with the different evidence tools and pieces of evidence that we were trying to get the functionality for those systems to work. So this portion, figuring out all of the functionality, took, I think it was like 4 months of work just to figure out the VR and the functionality and get those bugs to be a little bit more ironed out. Then came the aesthetics phase, which we looked at a lot of crime scene photos that Amy gave us and examples. We obviously had taken pictures of the actual evidence tools when we did the demo with her. So we tried to pattern them off the pictures and the reference photos that we saw. And everything was modeled in a software called Maya, which is in the same family as 3ds Max, if you've used that. So yeah, and then textured in Substance Painter to give it the realism and the color. The biggest portion that I wish we could have spent more time on was the playtesting phase. We actually got to have Amy students come in and playtest the game, give us their feedback, and we learned a lot. We thought we had set aside plenty of time with just 2 weeks of playtesting. Found out that was no near enough. The students that came in, the majority of them had never used VR before or even played any video games before. So having to bridge that gap from, here's this new, brand new system that you don't know how to use, now try and use it and implement it to what you learned in your class, was very eye-opening. So you can see in this photo right here, we had to build a huge tutorial, almost like a warehouse, where the students could come in and test every piece of evidence, every tool that they would be encountering in the scene, and so they could feel comfortable and relaxed and confident before they move on to the real crime scene, where they would actually be graded and tested in that part. So it was kind of funny. You can see these orange targets on the ground. We realized very quickly after we had first built the tutorial section that the students get in and they immediately just try and like push all the buttons that they can, and they end up moving to a completely different part and missing a lot of vital information and then being stuck. So we put these targets on the floor that would essentially forced them to step along the tutorial and actually read and learn every part of the vital information that was put in there for them. So that was an interesting learning experience. And of course, as we were playtesting, we encountered many bugs that when we were developing we hadn't had. You can see in this other photo is a UI element that says button, but obviously it's scaled way too big. Lots of funny, weird errors like that, and of course we would try and playtest, and then that night try and fix as many bugs as possible, put out a new build, and playtest again the next day. That wasn't always the case, so we had a lot of times when we would be playtesting for a couple days with the same known bugs, and just being like, sorry, we know it's a bug, just try and play around it as much as possible. But that is definitely a section that I would have spent a lot more time on if I could. So the full version of the game at the end of the development process was, obviously you saw the large tutorial section in the beginning. We implemented multiplayer for, I think we only tested 4, but it could be beyond 4 players. We had an NPC first responder, so in the normal scenario that Amy has, the students will come in and talk to the first responder. They'll give them kind of the rundown of events prior to them arriving on the scene. And so they know, like, oh, the body has been taken from the scene, or the victim and has later died at the hospital, and all of this stuff. So we implemented that with just a model of a person animated talking. We had an iPad that would do photography, the measurements, the mapping of the crime scene, having it all in one place just to make it easier for the students. And some of them hadn't taken their forensic photography class yet, so putting in a real DSLR wasn't vitally necessary. Obviously, functioning evidence tools with corresponding evidence, the grading system, and exportable scores and photos. So the grading system, as the students are graded through, that can be exported out and then sent to Amy, as well as their crime scene photos that they take throughout the game. So tomorrow we have 2 workshops where we will be allowing people to come in and play the demo version, which is honestly greatly shortened. But it should give you a good idea of what the full version is like. We shortened it because the majority of playtesters that came in would spend pretty much all their time in the tutorial section and would never actually get to the real crime scene. So we figured maybe a demo would be the best shot for that. And then